The stars are bright, we own the night. The stars are bright, we own. The stars are bright, we own the night. The stars are bright, we own. The stars.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of No Better Time Than the Present on this Friday evening, and yay for the weekend. I don't know about you, but I'm ready. Okay, so we have an amazing guest this evening. We have Jaime M. Sanders, and she's going to talk about her journey and her advocacy when it comes to migraines, chronic migraines, as well as mental health. This evening, we're speaking with Jaime Sanders, who is a patient advocate who has lived with migraine her entire life. She is the author of the award-winning blog, the Migraine Diva LLC. Her experience with migraine disease, depression, anxiety, and fibromyalgia has cultivated specific expertise in patient advocacy. As a Black woman navigating the healthcare system with multiple invisible illnesses, she has encountered racial and implicit bias from healthcare providers. Jaime's unique story details the many gaps in healthcare that people from marginalized groups with headache disorders face when seeking care and treatment. Through patient advocacy and self-empowerment, Jaime serves to empower and educate people with headache disorders and mental health. So we look forward to having this very deep little conversation with Jaime. But before we get into it, I do want to talk a little bit about what is chronic migraine. So we all know most people have experienced in one case or another a headache, okay? But has anyone really experienced the severity of a migraine? Okay, so what is chronic migraine? Okay, just as I said, we know a typical headache is pain or discomfort in the head or your face. Headaches vary greatly in terms of the location and intensity of the pain and how often the headaches occur. The brain tissue doesn't have pain-sensitive nerve fibers and doesn't feel pain, but the other parts of the head can be responsible for a headache. I always learn something new when I do these shows. So, migraine pain can be felt in the face, where it can be mistaken as a sinus headache, or in the neck, where it may be mistaken for arthritis or muscle spasm. Complicating the diagnosis of migraine is that the headaches may be accompanied by other sinus-like symptoms, including watered eyes, nasal congestion, and a sense of facial pressure. Most patients who think they have sinus headaches, in fact, have migraines. Okay, so, yeah. A little bit more details. What are some of the symptoms? Doing the research, migraines are a tad deep. So I'm not going to go into all the complexities of it, but headaches can range from a tension headache to a cluster headache. Okay. Symptoms of a migraine experience can range from a prodrome, which is like a phase 1, or an aura, which is a second phase. Okay, a pre-drome is 1 or 2 days prior to the migraine being active. Um, can be subtle changes that lead into mood changes, depression or euphoria, food cravings, neck stiffness, increased urination. Aura, which is the second phase, um, might be during a migraine. Okay, so auras are reversible symptoms of the nervous system. They're usually visual, but can also include other disturbances. Each symptom usually begins gradually, builds up after several minutes, and can last like an hour. Examples of a migraine aura is seeing various shapes, bright lights, bright spots, vision loss, pins and needles sensation in the arm or leg, weakness or numbness in the face or one side of the body, and difficulty speaking. So a migraine can be kind of intense, okay, based on that little um, explanation. To get Jamie on the line so that way we can talk a little bit more.
Hello.
Hey, how are
I'm
you?
doing pretty good. Thank you.
Wonderful. Happy Friday.
Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you. So, thank you for joining me this evening um, to talk a little bit about chronic migraine, what your journey has been like, and all of that good stuff. So, as you heard, I did a little research, okay, because we all know a headache as, oh, my head hurts, and then some people, they'll confuse, oh, I think I have a migraine, when clearly there's different phases of a headache, okay, and the complexity of what a migraine entails. So I have a bunch of questions, but I want you to tell me a little bit about yourself and your journey with chronic migraines as well as mental illness.
Absolutely. Again, thank you so much for having me tonight. I'm so excited to be able to talk to you and share my journey, which is a very long one, but I'll try to summarize it as best as I can. But I was diagnosed with migraine at the age of 8. But looking back and knowing everything I do know about the different types of migraine and phases of migraine, I definitely had migraine my entire life. As a toddler and up until the time I turned 8, I dealt with abdominal migraine, which is basically all of the symptoms that you would get with a migraine, with or without the headache. So, and it was mostly triggered for me by motion. So riding in the car, or even playing on the swings and things like that would trigger a lot of these abdominal type symptoms where I would get the nausea, vomiting for sure, inability to, lack of appetite, still had the sensitivities to sound and lights, odors. All of those things were I was very sensitive to all that stimuli. Um, but when I was in the 3rd grade is when I had my first migraine attack with headache. And I just remember being this, little girl trying to figure out why my head hurt so bad. And it would come on pretty quickly. And when you're a kid, you play hard. So we
Indeed.
overexert ourselves a lot, and physical exertion was definitely a big trigger. For example, I remember, after lunch we would have recess and we would be able to play in the playground. And I wanted to play and be just like all the rest of my friends. But if I played too hard or lost my breath or got too overexerted, I would wind up with a migraine for the rest of the school day and really would not be able to concentrate on my work. And I spent a lot of time in the nurse's office. And it wasn't well received, or there wasn't a lot of compassion from my teachers or my classmates. I missed school a lot because of these attacks. And so it was hard. It was very isolating as a kid. You know, I knew I was different. I couldn't do the things my friends were doing without risk of being in pain, you know, shortly thereafter. So I had to learn how to pace myself as a young kid, which is hard because I want to be like everybody else. But I couldn't. And that really made me feel alone as a kid. And that I can definitely say that those feelings manifested into, you know, feelings of depression. I can look back and say as a little kid, I was definitely dealing with, you know, depression, you know, with that mood disorder, because there's a lot of anxiety around having migraine. You just never know when you're going to have another attack. You're always mindful of the things that you do because you don't want to bring one on. We're kind of conditioned, unfortunately, with this neurological disease to blame ourselves for why we are experiencing this pain and the symptoms. So as a kid, I definitely felt like if I wound up with an attack, that it was something I did that I shouldn't have done. And so dealing with these feelings of guilt and disappointment as a kid was a lot to process. Um, but what was helpful for me, though, growing up was that my mother understood migraine because she has migraine herself. And so when I kept getting these really severe headaches, um, with the nausea and the vomiting, and having to be in a dark room, my mother would be putting cold washcloths on my forehead and trying to help me relax. Breathing made the pain worse, so I learned how to hold my breath for a period of time because it hurt to breathe. Um, but she understood that those symptoms weren't a typical headache. She recognized them as things she experienced herself, whenever she had an attack growing up. And so I was brought to my pediatrician, and she diagnosed me with having migraine. But my father wasn't really satisfied with that because he wanted to make sure that there wasn't anything structurally going on neurologically with me that can be the cause of the headaches. So I went to an ophthalmologist and had my eyes checked because my pain is always behind my left eye. And I always want to like rip my eyeball out because that's how painful it was. The pressure, and it feels like there's a vice grip around your eye trying to pop it out, and you just want to just remove it because you feel like if I take it out, the pain will stop. But when I had my eyes checked, my eyesight was perfect, nothing wrong with my eyes. And I got a referral to go see a neurologist in 1986 as an 8-year-old. Now that's unheard of. Even today, it's hard for pediatric migraine to get diagnosed. There aren't that many pediatric neurologists. We have a lack of headache specialists across the country. So getting diagnosed as a kid is not easy. So the fact that I was able to be seen by a neurologist, and he confirmed that it was migraine. He did a bunch of tests to make sure there wasn't anything else going on with me. Um, just solidified that it was definitely migraine, and I still have my records from that just as proof. Like, you know, I have this long history with this disease. Um, but again, it was not easy being a small kid trying to navigate this chronic pain and not really having the language to really explain or describe how that was affecting me emotionally. And the way I dealt with that was through writing poetry. That was my outlet. That was the best way I could express myself. But migraine has constantly been, you know, a sidekick of mine. It's always been there. And I learned at a very early age that I really could not depend on society to support me or understand what I was going through. So I dealt with the stigma of migraine for as long as I can remember. People just dismissing it, invalidating it, downplaying it, um, just thinking it's just a regular headache, which it is not. Migraine is not a headache. Migraine is a neurobiological disease, you know, that, you know, there isn't too many genes identifying, you know, that you have a migraine gene except for familial hemiplegic migraine, there are specific gene subsets for that particular type of migraine. But for any other headache disorder, there is no genetic testing we can do. There is no other diagnostic test to say this is what I have. So it's easy for people to dismiss it and invalidate it and just brush it off. And I dealt with that my entire life. And I learned how to depend on myself. And so was the rest of my family. Migraine runs on my mother's side of the family. So that's something that we all know. It was normal in our family to have migraine because so many of us do have it. But this basically continued through all my years of school. It really was a challenge, but I really did try not to let it overtake me. At the time, I was only episodic. So with episodic migraine, you have less than 15 headache days a month, with at least, I think, 8 of those being days with migraine. You can still have a headache, but you also, have an actual migraine attack. And when I was growing up talking about my disease with my doctors, and there really wasn't much I could do about it. I basically had to suffer through the pain. Pain management was very inadequate. And when you're a child, you're very limited in what you can take, because it's not FDA approved for pediatric migraine.
Right.
And at the time, migraine was really treated and seen as a blood vessel disorder. So I was put on a beta blocker on a blood pressure medication. I was on that for 5 years from the age of 8 to 14, and it didn't help at all, which was very frustrating. And I remember complaining to my doctors and my parents about having to take this medication that's not doing anything for me. But they was like, no, you got to keep taking it. You got to keep taking it because it's the only way you're going to get better. And so that was frustrating for me. And that left a bad taste in my mouth about taking daily preventive medications because I had no benefit from what I was on for that amount of time. But when it came to dealing with the pain and treating the pain, I was limited to Tylenol or Advil. And there wasn't a limit on how often I can treat. We know now that the more that you overuse pain medication, whether it's over the counter or prescription abortives, you run the risk of medication adaptation headache, where it becomes more difficult to break, and it can lead to chronification. And so because my entire childhood was basically taking unlimited amounts of like Tylenol and Advil just so I can get through the day, definitely set the path for why I'm chronic and intractable now, just because it was poorly managed as a kid. But that was my story basically all through, my school-aged years. And I just learned to deal with it. And I had a small silver lining though growing up. All my doctors told me I would outgrow migraine by the time I turned 18. So I thought there was an expiration date. And I looked at my mom. My mom really didn't experience migraine attacks so much. She knew what her triggers were, and she completely avoided them. They were mainly food triggers. So I never saw my mom have an attack. So I'm looking at, what the doctors are saying to me, and I'm putting all my faith and trust in their knowledge. And I'm looking at my mom who's living a normal life without this head pain. I've never seen her have an attack. I'm like, okay, my mom is my blueprint. I'm going to be just like my mom.
Right.
That was not the case for me, unfortunately. Migraine stayed with me past puberty, and it just became ingrained into who I was. I was Jamie with migraine because I had so many attacks. It was a part of who I am. And I didn't become chronic until well after my third pregnancy. In my third pregnancy, during my first trimester, I experienced my first intractable migraine, where I had a migraine attack that lasted all 90 days of my first trimester.
Whoa.
Yes. And so this was the first time I experienced migraine that lasted longer than 24 hours. And so that was a red flag for me, obviously. And being pregnant, I had to make sure that my body's healthy, the baby's healthy. So got a referral to neurology, had an MRI scan done, and I'm thinking something is going on in my brain because this is new, this is not normal, it's not my typical migraine attack. But my scans came back clean, nothing's going on. And that was a bit defeating. Not saying I wanted a cancer diagnosis or them saying I have an aneurysm or anything like that, but that's a bit more tangible and concrete, and there are treatment plans for that. But with migraine, there really isn't anything I can do, especially being pregnant, limited to what I can take preventatively and definitely limited on what I can use for pain management. So I just remember being at work and just working with the lights off. I couldn't have the lights on. I had 2 kids under the age of 3 at home. I'm pregnant with my third, working full time throughout the day, going to school full time at night, and I'm in pain every day. And it was just the most insane experience I've ever had. It was hard. I don't know how I made it through it. It was difficult. I mean, I was in tears almost every day. That's one of the worst feelings I ever had, being in a lot of pain and feeling like I can't breathe, but being nauseous at the same time. It was a horrible combination of side effects. And with the other triptans, I just couldn't tolerate them. They caused a lot of nausea, and or they just were ineffective. And so I started on this triptan journey, for a couple of years. And during those 2 to 3 years, I'm trying different abortive medications to see if that can help. I still have this mindset that I can cure this and I can stop this for good and I won't have to have another attack in my life again. Because the way migraine was explained to me and the way it was dealt with, there is no cure for migraine. On that roller coaster ride of trial and error with these medications, most of which are prescribed off-label. They're not FDA approved to treat migraine, but they were found to be effective in people who had migraine but were taking this particular medication for another disease area. So whether that be high blood pressure or depression and anxiety, or if you're epileptic, we find that a lot of those classes of medications work for people who also have migraine, help reduce the frequency and severity. So I went on this roller coaster ride of trial and error with these meds, and none of them helped. And I'm continuously progressing to become more chronic, if that's even possible, having almost every single day living in pain, and at that point, my kids are all in school. I'm a married woman trying to manage, keep a healthy relationship, feeling like a burden to my husband, who's now become my caretaker, not being able to show up as the mom that I want to, that I always dreamed that I would be. I mean, I've always knew I wanted to be a mom, so I take that role very seriously. And the fact that I couldn't play with my kids like I wanted to without being in pain, or I am already in pain. Or just even going on field trips and chaperoning and just being in severe pain the whole time. Like everything was a challenge for me. But I learned from a young age how to push through that pain. So I pushed through because that's all I knew how to do. But it's been 16 years now of being intractable, and being stuck in this daily state of pain has definitely impacted my mental health. So much so that back in 2012, I attempted suicide because I couldn't take it anymore. And that's a tough subject to talk about, but I've come to a point where I can without feeling the stigma of shame and guilt around it. But it was just, I was overwhelmed and I felt like a burden. And it was a decision that I felt was in the best interest of my family to ease their burden, because nothing was progressing with my health. It was just getting worse. But through the grace of God, I survived that. And I'm so grateful that I did, because it really changed my perspective on how I was looking at my disease and how I was treating it. Because at that point, it was like putting a Band-Aid on a bleeding artery. It just wasn't helping the treatments that I was going through. Um, and that changed my perspective a lot. Um, it forced me to really look at the smaller things in life, which have way more meaning than some of the bigger accomplishments that, we may have set out to want to achieve for ourselves. But it made me become more self-aware of where I'm at, and made me come to a realization that, this might be the rest of my life. So I need to get it together and really strengthen my fortitude and how I see things, in order to survive this on a daily basis. Um, and I started blogging as a result of feeling quite alone in this diagnosis of chronic daily migraine and being intractable. I just felt so alone, even though I had great support with my husband and my friends and family. Everybody was wonderful, but nobody that I knew was experiencing this like I am. No one in my family who has migraine is dealing with it on this level. I have it the most severely. So it's still a very lonely place to sit in. So I started to blog. And again, it goes back to the days when I was younger and I would write to express myself. So writing is something that is a creative outlet for me. It's cathartic. And I wanted to use that platform to dispel the stigma behind migraine as well as mental health disorders, especially as a Black woman. There weren't that many, I didn't see any faces like myself in the community. And I know how in the Black family, we really don't talk about our health. And we don't really, discuss things having to do with mental health, which I know is probably a very common thing amongst a lot of different cultures, but I can only speak to my Black experience. So I
Right.
just knew like nobody really talked about anything. And so I wanted to also break that, you know, to stop that silence behind, our ailments. That doesn't make us a weak individual, doesn't make us less than or less worthy. Um, there's some strength in standing in that vulnerability. And so the blog was a tool, that helped me achieve that, help me build community around myself, and help educate others as well at what migraine actually is, how it shows up, how it is so disabling and disruptive, and it steals your joy and it steals your ambition and your ability to, want to set goals and try to achieve them. It just really has a, a hold on your life, in a way that I call it like, it's a thief. I call migraine a thief because it steals a lot of things away from us. And when you're living on walking on eggshells the whole time, worried about another attack occurring, you're really not living your fullest life. And so I really wanted to portray that in my blog. And at the time when I started it, it was back in 2011 when I started blogging. I had no idea about advocacy, I never heard the word really, I don't think, or I probably have never paid attention. My goal wasn't to become a patient advocate. I just really wanted to just be honest and vulnerable and transparent and validate myself through telling of my story, which in turn validates other people's experience as well as they read what I write. But it just snowballed into this, what became a conduit into advocacy for me. And I remember being contacted by one of the pharmaceutical companies to be a part of a migraine panel they were doing at a conference. And I thought that email was spam. I'm like, are you serious? You want me to come talk? I'm just this girl from Queens who happens to have migraine. I'm really, not a public speaker. But that was my first introduction into speaking about migraine on a public platform. And it was a very empowering moment. The conference was, full of women who blog about different areas of life, lifestyle, travel, beauty, fashion, all those things. It's a huge blogger conference, and it's full of women. And migraine disproportionately, with the data that we have, affects women more than men, which we really don't know how true that statistic is, because there's still probably about 1 million people who are undiagnosed in this country, who are living with migraine and headache, and men aren't as, open when talking about their pain. So, but what we see now statistically, women have migraine more than men do, from what the data shows and what the research shows. But we got to do better, because I know the numbers are different. But being in that space, and these women in the audience coming to listen and asking the question, how many of you have migraine? And almost every hand went up in that room. And that was just incredible, but they just don't talk about it. And so I felt like me telling my story and being open and honest about it helped empower some of the women in the audience to talk more about their experience living with migraine. So that was just a really cool moment. And that just opened the doors for me, to be introduced to different organizations, who work in a headache and migraine space. And I just was labeled a patient advocate. I'm like, well, okay, I guess that's what I am. But advocacy, and really started for me by finding my voice and really becoming the driver of my healthcare journey, and understanding that, my relationship with my healthcare team should be a partnership, not a dictatorship. I'm the one who is the expert in with my body and my level of disease progression. I know that probably way more in depth than a lot of folks in the healthcare space, unless they're one of the brilliant headache specialists in the country who sole focus is for treating headache disorders. You don't always come across a lot of compassion from other physicians or healthcare staff when you come in talking about migraine. But I had to learn to stand in my truth and really push for the type of care that I know I deserved. And finding out how to do that and talking about that through my blog will help empower others to find their voice and to really drive their healthcare journey. Try to do my part as best as I can, and really try to help empower patients to really share their story, without feeling like they're going to be judged or criticized. One of my favorite mantras is, to tell people that they are not their migraine. We tend to personify our symptoms a lot of the time, and we hold this internal stigma too, and we berate and beat ourselves up if we're not able to show up in a way that we feel like we should, due to migraine. But that's not our fault. You didn't cause this. You didn't make this happen. You're not a bad person. You're still full of value. You're still worthy of, a happy life. And it's all about trying to find, those different rays of light in your life that, uplift you and give you a sense of joy. And so it's important for people to know they are not their migraine. They're not their mental illness. You are not your, depressed feelings or your anxious feelings. I try to change my language when it comes to mental health. I don't like saying I am depressed, because that personifies it way too much and gives depression way too much power, especially for someone like myself who's deeply affected, like I have, persistent depressive disorder. So it's really like hard sometimes to manage, but I have to tell myself that's not me. My brain is just wired differently, and it makes me feel things I don't want to feel, or makes me think things I don't want to think. And so instead of saying I am depressed, I say I am having feelings of depression, or I'm going through a depression flare right now. It takes away a lot of its power over me. That's basically my story. That's where I'm at, what I do.
All right.
It's a long one, but I'm just, grateful that I'm able to have this space in order to help not me process what I'm dealing with, but help others through their journey as well.
Thank you, Jamie. Is you said some very important things, as you were explaining your story. I think we had got a couple of comments. Someone was saying that migraine is awful. Um, at my myeloma journey, I've suffered since I was 16, which I'm still surprised on your story, diagnosed at 8, you know. So she said, so this is really a great topic, and thank you, ladies. And then we have, as well, my myeloma journey. Better blockers definitely don't help. So some people have gone through similar situations. And she actually sent a question. She wanted to know, have you ever been offered, I know I'm not going to say it right, topo,
So,
topomerate,
Pyramate, yeah,
topamax,
Topamax.
topamax.
Yes, I've
Okay.
been on Topamax. Topamax I had to get off of because it caused too many tremors for me. Um,
Mhm.
and yeah, I was on Topamax back in like 2007, 2008. That was a long time ago. But yeah, I've tried Topamax. That didn't help me at all. That has a whole host of side effects as well, that a lot of people tend to have. Like it'll work for them as far as helping to decrease the severity and frequency of their migraine, but sometimes the side effects are just way too much. I believe it can cause like hair loss. You have like the shakes, the tremors, like muscle spasms. Um, I can't remember all of them, but they're pretty. Those side effects from that medication are pretty tough.
And we appreciate, you sharing that. Like I say, I think a lot of people can relate when it comes to headaches, migraines, specifically, especially if they have another chronic condition, right?
Right.
So, though they may not have experienced things as young as you did, you know, which that's still blowing me away, that young. But I think some people may be able to experience that as well, along with some other conditions. So what I wanted to ask you, you hit upon a lot of things, so we don't really have to go over because I had like a lengthy question thing, but you kind of hit upon a lot. But like on a rate of 1 to 10, how do you feel now?
Right now, I'm a 1, which I
Okay.
haven't been in a long time, but that's thanks to the treatment I got last week in Philly. So if I didn't have that, I'd be probably around a 5 or a 7 right now.
Oh, okay. And what is one thing that brings you some type of ease when you do have an active migraine, or does anything?
Um, that's a tough question for me because I've had an active migraine attack for 16 years straight.
Mhm.
So really what helps for me is pacing myself. I have to pace myself and I have to take stock in what I'm feeling, how my body's feeling, every day and proceed from there. I don't know if you ever heard of the spoon theory, but by Christine Miserando, she developed this spoon theory for people who live with chronic illnesses. And you only have, say, like 12 spoons for the day, and you have to divvy them up against, what tasks you have to do, but you want to still have some spoons left over because you don't want to deplete your energy source. So there are days where I I may only have 5 spoons that day, and I wind up using them all, and I'm done. So when I know I only have this limited amount of spoons or energy, I have to really take stock in like what's important, what can I do, what can wait, and also communicating that with my family that, you know, that's around me, like with my husband, my kids, just be like, hey, this is where I'm at today. And this is, you know, I'm not able to function. I'm not able to do this. That's really a key thing for me. I have to pace myself. I have to be honest about what I can and cannot achieve on any specific day, and give myself grace for the times and the days where I
Mhm.
just can't do anything.
For sure. You definitely need grace. Um, I think a lot of advocates don't give themselves that level, you know. And it's funny you said grace. I had another advocate friend of mine last year. It's too long of a story, but like, you know, the word grace, but she she was so poetic in terms of how the thing we was talking about, and she was like, you know, give that person grace. And since she said that, it's just kind of like opened up my mind a little bit more in terms of even myself, you know, of putting a lot of, I guess, I hate the word burden, but you know, you're just thinking about something that you probably shouldn't be thinking about, or being extra hard on yourself. And just,
Mm-hmm.
hey, we've kind of been through a lot. So just give yourself that grace. So that's like my new word for the whole year.
Yeah, grace goes a long way when you you know learn to give it to yourself and then to others. But it really makes a huge difference when you let let yourself off the hook. You know.
Exactly. Exactly. So as we kind of chime into, you know, wrap this up, I wanted to, like, I usually with my questions, I'll throw a little okey doke up in there. So, what type of music is your description of, let's say, a level 10 migraine?
Oh, level 10 is like a headbanger, like heavy metal.
Oh, Lord.
Yes, very loud and obnoxious, and not to you know disrespect anybody who listens to heavy metal or has a which is that's just it's just loud, it's in your face, um screaming, just all this stuff going on in your head where it's just so overwhelmingly loud and obnoxious and in your face and just won't quiet down. I would say, you know, some like hardcore heavy metal song is what like a level 10 migraine feels like.
Oh, child. Hey, this last question that I want to ask, or close to last, have you tried any alternative methods? I know you said, you know, FDA, there's like new stuff, different trials, and it's not seeming like it's coinciding with what your particular situation. So have you tried anything alternative, and did it work or not really?
Oh, yes, I've gone through the alternative and complementary
Mm,
medicine avenue. I've tried acupuncture, acupressure, massage therapy, which I still do. I found that stacking those types of treatments together works better for me. So, for instance, when I was getting acupuncture done, I would go get my acupuncture, and then I would have a massage booked like right afterward. And I
mm,
felt like the
mhm.
combination of the two really like worked a lot for me. I just haven't gone back to acupuncture because by itself it doesn't do much.
Okay.
Um, and um, ever since COVID, I've been having a hard time booking massages. I have like a membership with Massage Envy, and like they're constantly booked. So it's like I haven't done that combination in a while. But I still utilize massage therapy. Mindfulness
Hmm.
is huge. I'm not awesome at meditating on my own. I have to use guided imagery, but definitely mindfulness activities are helpful for me, including art therapy is something I do. I love to do, I went to my first paint and sip a couple years ago and I fell in love.
Oh, that's cool.
And so I bought my own canvases and paint and everything. And so I'll just order some sketches off of Etsy and just put that on my canvas and paint that. And my daughter and I will have our own like sip and paint nights, but I'm not sipping anything. I'm too busy painting. But I consider that a form of therapy that I do. For a few years, I actually had a neurostimulator implanted in my scalp, like right here under my skin.
Wow.
And I had that for a few years. So that was just, using non-pharmacologic methods to treat or deal with my pain. But now I use different neuromodulation devices. There are several out there on the market for migraine. There's the Cephaly device, which I have, which goes on your forehead. And then there's the Nerivio device, which I also have, which goes on your arm. And there's a couple of others too. There's Relivion, and there's another one I'm blanking on, but it stimulates the vagus nerve. So I definitely use non-pharmacologic methods to help treat and prevent. Um, I don't lifestyle changes, obviously, watching, what I eat, trying to stay physically active, having, a good sleep hygiene, going to bed at the same time or around the same time every night, turning down or powering off devices. I have my migraine glasses. I have several pairs of those with the special FL41 tint, which blocks out like blue light and a lot of the other lights that can trigger a migraine attack. So I incorporate all of these things in my daily life. And it's a lot of work. It takes a lot to manage all these different things. But it's something I have to do in order to have some semblance of normalcy in my life, where I can be functional.
Right.
It's a lot.
You've been through a lot. You've been through a lot, Jamie. You've been through a lot. And, sometimes it's shoe on the other foot, because some people get it and some people they just don't get certain things. It's crazy. But what parting words would you tell someone who is, dealing with migraine?
Um, the biggest thing for me is just knowing that you are not, your disease, um, and that there's a great community of people and organizations that can help, you know, you find the right tools to put into your migraine toolkit. No matter what your chronic illness is, you have like a toolkit, you have something that you go to, your bag of tricks, to help you manage and cope and function. Um, and it's important for people to know that your toolkit is an important piece of your management of of your migraine. And just remember that you didn't do this to yourself.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of the time, when we talk about triggers specifically, there's this connotation, even from healthcare providers, when it comes to triggers, where if you were to indulge in one of your triggers and you wound up with an attack, that you did it to yourself. And that's really not the case. Um, it's a cascade of events that have to happen before you kind of breach that threshold where you wind up with a migraine attack. This could have happened, this could have started days before you actually have the attack. Whether you haven't been sleeping well, on top of maybe not drinking enough water for the last day or two, or overexerting yourself one day, and then the next day, you decide to have a hot dog, and then you wind up, once you finish that hot dog, you wound up with an attack. Well, it wasn't necessarily the hot dog. That's just the thing that tipped it over.
Mhm.
And like we have very you know, sensitive brains, and we're very sensitive to the stimuli. And so just understanding that um, it's just not you. This is just the way your brain responds to the environment around you. And you can still get your life back and still achieve your goals. Once you fully understand, you know, what you're dealing with, you understand how important it is to, you know, stick to a preventive treatment, um, and really foster, you know, that voice that you have inside of you to really, you know, get you to a place where you feel like you're satisfied with your treatment. Um, but yeah, it's important for people to know you are not this disease, and you can still have a productive life. Despite me being intractable, um, I still found a way to find my joy. Um, and that's true for anybody, regardless of, you know, where on the migraine spectrum they fall.
I love it. I love it. So, how and where can viewers learn and follow you and learn more about your advocacy?
Sure. So I'm on Instagram and X, or formerly known as Twitter, at Migraine Diva. I have a Facebook page, which I had to create a new one because my Facebook got hacked and I couldn't access my old account. So I had to create a whole new page. But it's Migraine Diva on Facebook. Um, and I have my blog, themigrainediva.com, where you can read, you know, my past posts about my journey. I've been quite busy, so I haven't posted on there in a minute, but there's some really, really good information on there as well, and some resources for people to follow and get more information. Um, and yeah, I think that's it.
This was such a good episode, and from beginning to end. And I'm really appreciative that you took the time to explain everything and really dissect the condition, your experience, the trials that are out there. I think you kind of summed up everything in one, which was great. So I think a lot of the viewers who came on and off and those who view this later, I think they will get a lot from your experiences. So I really want to say thank you again for having a conversation with me. And everyone will have the replays up in a couple of days. And don't forget to subscribe and follow us on YouTube to get all of that good stuff. But Jamie, this was really a delightful observation, okay, of your life. And I have to say you've been through a lot, and I'm here. I'm happy that you're still here to encourage other people and all of that. So
Thank
just
you.
prayers and hugs to you.
Thank you. Oh, my mother is on. Thanks, mommy.
Oh, hi, Penny Crooks. That's so
She's
sweet.
always supporting me. Ever since I was a little kid, she's always got my back. So
I love it. That's so beautiful. So thank you, everyone. I hope everyone has a blessed and beautiful weekend. And Jamie, again, it was a pleasure, and we'll be in touch for sure.
thank you again for having me and for letting me share my story with your followers. And hopefully, you know, somebody will come away feeling validated and heard and understand that, you know, things can improve. You can still, you know, carve a life out for yourself despite this migraine diagnosis and living with migraine.
Definitely. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.